We recently were looking for an Uber ride to go visit one of our neighbors in Nairobi. We got the Uber, and when we drove, the Uber told us we'd arrived. The map said we were where we were meant to be. It instructed the driver to drop us off. But when we were calling our friend, he kept saying, "Look, I don't live there. I don't live there." But we'd gotten the pin from him and we just used everything, but he just said, "No, I don't live there, that's not my place." As we soon figured out, what was happening is there was a valley and a river separated it. And my friend had given us the pin to his place, and where we were seeing his place, but it was just right across the valley, separated basically by a wall. We'd used what looked like a correct map, but we were lost. Every time I look at the workers of the future, I get that knowing sense in my mind that well-meaning teachers, career coaches, pastors, chaplains are busy giving them maps. But those maps are not well adjusted to the ground. That it is likely going to happen to them like it did with our Uber driver. Would think we've arrived, but we haven't. More powerfully, I think one of the biggest challenges we're having with the workers of the future is that we're trying to help them discover new lands while using old maps. It is completely impossible to explore new frontiers while relying on the tools, the tricks, and the tactics of old. We need a new way. If we believe that the next generation is not going to be more of the old, but it's going to be a completely new thing, new way of doing mission, new way of doing family, new way of loving, new way of creating, we cannot keep relying on the old maps that worked for us in the old pre-digital generation to be able to craft their path. We will need to get new maps for the new world. Otherwise, the pin will keep saying they've arrived, while in fact, we have a whole workforce that is lost. Even with automation, we will still need people behind the robots. Even with things being made more digital, we'll still need humans to do the programming. Work will change. The workforce will shift, but there'll always be a workforce. And if we're ever going to be able to create an effective next generation, we will need to be able to address the question of work. Remember, as said before, work is God's appointed way to build the bridge between dreams and reality. And if we're therefore going to create an authentic next generation, we must have an authentic chat about conversations you and I would like to avoid. And today we want to have one such authentic conversation around the issue about the next generation's workforce. Please welcome to Acacia Season 2, and this is Raising an Authentic Generation. We are trailing the experience of the prodigal son. Why did he leave? What did he experience? What can we learn from him about raising this generation so that we reduce the level of prodigality, if that is English, that is people who would be prodigals. And so far we have arrived at the point about workforce. Let's bring down the verse, still the same passage we've been considering so far in the series, which is Luke chapter 11, and I'd like us to be able to begin reading from verse 15 through to 22.
Continued. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, There was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet.'"
In this entire passage, you begin realizing a few things. There's mention of work, at times directly, at times indirectly. Directly is this boy came from a home where there were workers. Eventually, this boy would want to go back home to workers. His brother, who has a prodigal heart and maybe does not have the courage to just walk out, is also reported as having claimed that he has spent home working. The boy, when he ran into a difficult time, spent some time working as a pig keeper. And what's more, if he wasted his substance on riotous living, there must have been people working openly or secretly in behind the scenes to make sure that that was possible. So the ability to adapt to the various work scenarios is something that is very apparent if this boy was going to be a real person with real skills for the real world. But in this case, he wasn't. In a time of famine, you see him sinking lower than he'd been before. Reason is because the work skills he had possessed before were less than ideal. Furthermore, when he gets back home and asks to be able to be incorporated into his father's workforce, the father, out of pure grace, refutes this particular preposition. Who knows? Maybe it's because he knows the work ethic or lack of it from his son. But that can be debated theologically. My focus here is purely on how can the next generation of people be raised up to become a genuine, truly transformative workforce, irrespective of industry, and more especially for we who belong to the community of faith, is to be able to see how can we be able to raise an authentic generation of workers who truly transform. Now, when you look and contrast the various work situation in the story of the prodigal son, you do realize that it gives us both the challenge we have with raising a proper workforce and, blessedly, also the solutions are suggested inherently. Let's begin with the challenge side. Challenge number one is this boy, the prodigal's boys, were more concerned when it came to workforce with a label that they possessed rather than the skill. That is why the son who leaves home begins by saying, "Give me the portion of wealth that belongs to me." He was more concerned with the label, and in this case, his label was son. And when he had the label called son, he was more focused on the tokens and the perks that came with being and possessing that label. He was not thinking about the value he could add or the value he could create. He was more obsessed with the value he could get and what money he could be able to make from the entire thing. The old way of doing things was focused on labels. You saw a lot of it in the questions you had around family meetings when a well-meaning uncle or aunt or nephew or niece would ask you questions like, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? What do you want to do when you grow up? What those probing questions were more interested in was a label, and they celebrated ideas like doctor and engineer and pilot, and something that could fit in a nice, well, clearly predefined label set. But newsflash, 2007, for instance, happened, and Apple released the first iPhone, which changed the world of computing in very many ways. This is more than 14 years after that first release happened, and in its wake, we've been able to see people like social media influencers. We've been able to see digital marketers. We've been able to see all manner of techpreneurs coming up, not only after the smartphone, but also after the App Store came up. Now, I was in college around that time, and I bet you, I kid you not, none of my relatives, if I'd told them that when I grow up I want to be a techpreneur, would either have understood or even agreed. It is because I came from an older dispensation, one that sought for labels rather than looking for something different. And so, challenge number one that is making us create an inauthentic workforce is because we are more focused on labels that worked in an older world than in being able to solve something deeper. The second thing is this set of actors in this entire story were more concerned about the value they gained than the value they gave. The boy was employed by somebody who put him to keep the pigs. Okay, and this pig owner seems to be only interested in not the welfare of this boy, because this boy is so hungry. He would have fed himself on the pods, but the pig owner counts him as a worker, probably showing the psyche of his time. And maybe it is the psyche that is also present in creating an inauthentic workforce in church and in society, and that is the workforce of thinking, what's in it for me? Or something for nothing, or the basic way of describing that particular psyche is a psyche of thinking about the value I gain rather than the value I give. The boy asks for his wealth from his father because he was thinking about the value he would gain. The brother stays home, not because of the value he thought he would give, but because of the value he thought he would gain from it. This entire mass of inauthentic people who lack the reality of being people with real skills for a real world is premised or predicated on folly number two, which is thinking more about the value they want to gain rather than the value they want to give. And then the third sad reality about them is they were all thinking, and very closely tied to the second point, is they were all thinking about the short-term gain. They're not thinking about the way they would transform their environment, but then they were thinking about what they would gain from their environment. So for them, their environment was a theater that served nothing more but as an atmosphere to be able to help them satisfy and fulfill their own narrow and selfish desires. Naturally, therefore, they moved from one area to the other, and when a famine, which is an event that shaped the environment quickly and unexpectedly happened, they were completely flat-footed, because the lens at which they looked at their environment is they looked at it not as a space for them to impact, but they looked at their environment as a space that exists to merely serve them. And when a whole shift happened in that ecosystem, the boy was completely flat-footed. When his younger brother returns home, the older boy is seeing a change in his environment for which he is completely unprepared for, because he saw this environment as a space for gain, and now the reintroduction of his brother there completely messed up the environment, so much so that some of even the resources he'd helped to bring up are now being used to celebrate the brother's return, and he is completely unfitted for this reality. And similarly is a reality for people who are operating with the old maps, the maps of labels, the maps of taking, the maps of seeing the environment as merely a theater for the fulfillment of their dreams. When the changes happen because of the digital economy, when the changes happen because people are no longer too interested in labels, when the changes happen because people can now work from home without supervision, and where organizations have flatter structures, or where in churches individuals are now reading the Bible more and are becoming more exposed and able to ask questions, we're finding a lot of leaders completely out of their depth. We're finding a lot of future would-be workers completely out of their depth because, again, they're trying to look for new lands but using old maps. What would the new maps for the new world and the new reality look like? Reality change number one is this, and you see this brilliantly with the Father. When the Father is receiving the Son in the story, the Son is willing to still function within this label economy. He comes with a pre-written speech and says, I'll be called a servant, because that's the economy his workforce skills were, his workforce mindset was set for. But the Father was at this point operating at something different. He tells him, you cannot be a servant. He gives him a cloth and he gives him every other thing to return him to the status of sonship. Because there was something about being a son that cannot be labeled in or labeled out. And therefore, what I'm learning here is this. The workforce of the future, if we are going to raise an authentic generation, and let me digress here for a minute and say, I believe strongly with all my heart that if the church, the Christian church at this time, is able to rethink its services, it's able to rethink its religious education, it's able to rethink the activities people do within churches, it can become one of the forefront places where the next generation's workforce is created. Imagine for me, why is it that we have people playing the piano in church, but then are not able to leverage that to be able to chase a career in music where they add value? Why is it that we have people who serve titles as elders or deacons or deaconesses where they do a lot of organization and project management and everything, and after years and years of doing that, that skill is not able to transform in a way that they can be able to leverage on it for economic inclusion and society transformation? Pardon my 2 minutes of digression, but the point I hope is still home, that the church should begin rethinking itself, not merely as a receiver, not merely as just a place where people come to worship God, but it can begin thinking of itself as being at the forefront of creating an environment where, as people worship God with their talents, they similarly can be able to simultaneously develop the wherewithal they will need to become apt workers in the workforce of the future. But I return for my digressing. The first thing I learned for the workforce of the future is they will need to move from a label orientation to a skills orientation. The labels orientation is the one that asks, what do you want to be 5 years down the road? It is more concerned about a nice fitting label. But a skills orientation begins asking, what skills do I possess? Which is a totally different orientation. The label orientation is more concerned about academic papers, and don't get me wrong, schools have their place, but they're not everything. Skills orientation begins asking the more poignant questions, which is, which skills have I gotten? It doesn't matter whether I got it from my service in community, or service in the church, or service in society, or as an apprentice, or in school. But what is able to see is that I have demonstrable skills in one domain or another. The skills orientation, therefore, is not focused on what label will I be given, where will I position myself 5 years from now, but the skills orientation asks a second, more probing question, which is, where are these skills needed? Which opens the possessor of the skills to becoming more attuned to the needs that exist in their society. You see, it is a rule of life that money follows value, always. Money follows value, and value follows pain. So it is very easy to know where you could make money by simply tracking what pains are people trying to solve. And as you provide solutions based on your skills for the pains that people are trying to solve, they will respond, they will vote back with their money, they will vote with their commitment, they will vote with their customership, they will vote with their allegiance, but money will always follow value. What the label orientation lost sight of is the idea that People are not more obsessed with the label you possessed, but people are more asking, what pain are you able to help them solve? The skills orientation, which is what the father is trying to instill in both his sons in the story of the prodigal son, makes them begin stopping to think. And you get this powerfully when he tells the son who remained and tells him, you're always with me. Everything I have is yours. The idea is not, you don't need to struggle to be a son. The idea is, what skill, what value, what pain are you helping to address? So the workforce of the future is not a workforce that is going to be obsessed with their labor. It's going to be a workforce that is thinking more through the lens of, what skills do I possess and how can I use them to be able to address the pains in the community that I exist in. The second thing we saw is that the wrong dimension looks at what value can they gain rather than they can give. But the second correct way, after thinking through skills, is, as I've already alluded to, the people who look at themselves as the workforce of the future ask a different question, which is, A, what skills do I possess? B, which areas do I feel led to make a difference in? That may mean, which pain do I want to solve? That may mean, which strain do I want to resolve? You see, it's one thing, for instance, you can be a doctor, you can be a medical doctor. If you're thinking through the lens of labor, you're thinking, what title do I want to have? Neurosurgeon, nephrologist, whichever labor you want to possess. But if you're thinking through the new approach, the skills lens, what you're asking yourself is, what kind of people do I want to serve? In which spaces are these people? And what do I want to help them achieve by me being there? If you're a journalist, you're not asking, do I want to be the chief editor, or do I want to be this or the other? You're asking yourself, these skills I possess, and not the titles I possess. It's not journalism. As a journalist, you have the ability for analyzing, storytelling, breaking down things, and you're asking yourself the question, what skills do I possess, regardless of where you got them? But secondly, you're asking yourself the important question, where can I apply, or where do I feel led to be able to apply this? So some people want to use their journalism skills and the branch of skills there to be able to tell stories of change, or stories that champion, or stories that bring out courage. And therefore you find them maybe going into investigative journalism. What you soon realize is this: when you offer people value, people respond by labeling you. When you offer people value, people respond by giving you value. When you go into every community, people have names, but then it is a community that gives them the title. And that is why you'll hear so-and-so the grocer, or so-and-so the fishmonger, or so-and-so the teacher, or so-and-so the counselor, or so-and-so the confident. People give people labels because of the value they get from them. And so when we become less obsessed with the label we will be given and begin thinking about the pain we will solve and the people we want to solve, the people will respond in kind by labeling us. And also, as already intimated, money follows value. And as we give people value, they therefore will give us not only money, but they will be the ones responsible for giving us the particular label. And that label represents the pain we are helping them address. And in the next generation markets, that is why we're already seeing things like speechpreneur, or tenderpreneurs, or talkpreneurs. People, depending on the value they are getting, we're getting labels that did not exist when I was going to school. And if we are going to equip the next generation to chart these new waters, there will need to be given a new map. That new map does not ask the question of what's my label, but that map, the new map asks, what is my tribe? Which people am I trying to serve? What am I trying to help them be able to achieve? What will be different about them by me being there? And then finally was the environment. The environment in the old map dispensation is seen as a place to be exploited, but the environment in the new map dispensation is viewed as a place to be explored. It's seen as a place to be enriched. because the new map dispensation believes by enriching and giving back to the environment will in turn become able to sustain. Or put in another way, as one of my former supervisors like to encourage us to think through, it is don't just solve problems in a way that creates opportunities for others. Don't just be a problem solver. Solve problems in a way that creates opportunities for others. It is becoming increasingly clear that a lot of the capitalistic models that informed the former way of thinking may not be adequate for where we are going. And if we keep raising the new generation to think in purely capitalistic terms, we are probably setting them up for something that will be less than ideal. All the studies that are being done on millennials and on Gen Zs is showing that they're having an increased appetite for things like social change and social justice and giving back. And because this will be the dominant consumers and the drivers of things going down the future, it seems that the models that were built around accumulation and aggressively putting things and monopolizing may become less and less tasty. We're beginning to see consumers who are less tolerant to monopolistic behavior and are more concerned about the value and about the value that people give out there. If our children and if the next generation are going to become next generation workforce thriving individuals, they will need to begin being trained to see the environment not just merely as a space to take from. And I'm not just speaking about the physical environment, but I'm speaking about the community of people. I'm speaking about the networks that we have, that they should not just be merely seen as spaces to be exploited, but they need to be seen as a space to be returned to. I thought of a way to end our time together. And I thought to remind us two verses that I find in the Bible that are very powerful. Many of the Proverbs, there's a book in the Bible called the Proverbs. Many of them were written by the man Solomon. They are wisdom for everyday living. And in the 22nd chapter of Proverbs and the very last verse, it's verse 29, it says, "Do you see a man who is diligent in his business? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before mean men." But there's an initial verse before that, which is found in the 18th chapter of Proverbs and the 16th verse, which says, "A man's gift will make room for him and bring him before great men." And when those two things are put together, it begins telling you that the Bible was, in a certain sense, ahead of its time in terms of the wisdom that will be needed for the next generation of workers. Because it recognizes two important things in Proverbs 18:16 and Proverbs 22:29. It recognizes, number one, the diversity of gifts. For it says, it is a man's gift that will make open doors for him. It's not a man's label. It's not a man's title, but it's a man's gifts. I'm able to come to you because this is recorded. Now, I don't know anything about recording, but there are people who are equipped and talented in this. And their gift has made them doors, has opened for them doors, so much so that they're able to work with this broadcaster. I may not possess the gift they do, but I may possess some amount of gift as a communicator. And so leveraging my gift and them leveraging their gift together, we're able to create an environment where we are not competing, but we are complementing, and our gifts is able to be then more accentuated. Doors are opened to us, but the room we occupy in the room that is opened to us is different rooms. I therefore do not see the media people as a threat, and they don't see me as a threat, they see me as a partner. That's more of the mindset for the next generation workforce, which is not dominion, it is collaboration. But there's a caveat already there in the Bible. It says it's not automatic that these doors will open. It will require diligence. It will require hard work. Seest thou a man diligent in his business? He will be, to use my own words, the next generation workforce. There is a next generation workforce that needs to be built intentionally, deliberately, and purposefully. And to do this, they will not need to think of labels. They will need to think about skills. They'll not to think about the value they gain. They'll think about the value they give, the people, the tribe they serve, and what difference they make in their lives. And they will need to think about the environment, not as a space to grab and gain, but they will need to see the environment as a space to collaborate, to create. The Bible endorses this. The changes in the world necessitate it. Until next time, let's continue having this authentic dialogue about conversations we avoid, specifically about raising an authentic generation.